Greater Boston Legal Services is expanding its outreach to the Asian community. To tell us about the effort is the organization's senior attorney and head of the Asian Outreach Unit, Bethany Lee. Thank you very much for being with us, Bethany.
Thanks for inviting us.
First of all, talk about what's different now that you have this unit with Greater Boston Legal Services.
This unit has actually been in existence for more than a couple decades. It's just recently we're actually rebuilding our capacity, and we've been able to reopen our community-based intake locations both in Chinatown and in Dorchester, so that we are doing more outreach, more communication, more representation of people in the Vietnamese and Chinese communities, as well as other lower income Asian American communities.
Well, certainly those populations have been growing in recent decades, and not just in the city of Boston, but even outside. So you're covering all of that territory?
Well, we have geographical limitations, but to the extent that there are lower income Asian Americans who need our help, we try to help, whether it's through full representation, referrals, and you're right, the Asian American population is actually the fastest growing immigrant population in the United States, and we're seeing the variety of problems that, that you might associate with that in terms of housing, employment, family law, immigration issues. And we take what we call a community lawyering approach, which is we try to be directly responsive to the needs of the community. So we work with a variety of grassroots organizations in each of these communities to make sure that we're responding to the community's needs.
What about just individuals? Let's say someone's worried about being evicted. What can they do as far as taking advantage of a program like this?
We would encourage them to come into our community-based intake locations, which in Chinatown happen on Mondays at Chinese Progressive Association from 1:30 to 4:30, and South Cove Medical Center on Tuesdays from 10 a.m. to noon, and then in Dorchester at Viet Aid on Mondays from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m.
Tell me a little bit about the different kinds of cases, I guess the mix, because these days we do hear a lot about displacement and eviction. Is that the largest bunch of cases that you have to handle now?
There are a variety of cases that we handle, but certainly in our conversations with community groups in the past few months, displacement gentrification issues has been at the top of the list, both in the Vietnamese and the Chinese communities. And we're talking about neighborhoods like Chinatown and Dorchester, but we're also talking about other cities like Malden and Quincy, where increasingly the grassroots organizations and the people we're seeing from each of these places, they're telling us that that displacement is occurring, that gentrification is happening, that rents are going up, and it's getting harder and harder to find an affordable place to live.
Another common problem for many kinds of immigrants is doing work and not getting paid, at least not getting paid what they should be paid. You help with that, I imagine? Absolutely.
We do a variety of work in employment law, including helping people get their wages back. We represent people in a variety of industries, working in restaurants, in construction, in manufacturing, and we're also expanding our outreach to the Vietnamese community, many of whom, at least many of the women who work in the nail salon industry.
What about the problems in that industry too? Because sometimes it's wages, but it can also even be hazardous working conditions. It's hard to breathe in those places without showing something for it.
Right, that's absolutely right. I think there's, it's exactly what you just said. It's both you're not getting the proper wages. Sometimes you're being misclassified as an independent contractor, so you're also not getting the right wages. And then there's the chemicals that you're breathing in every day. Some solutions have been to put in vents, but the vents actually have been drawing up those particles into people's lungs rather than pushing them down, which would be more helpful. There's a variety of issues in many of these industries where low-income immigrants predominate.
I want to come back to the eviction scenario, because a lot of the times you've got these market changes in the neighborhoods. They're pretty dramatic. It just costs a lot more to live there than it used to be. So can you do much to help people when they're up against that?
I think that's in part why we work with the grassroots organizations that we do. I think on an individual basis, sometimes you're not able to fight against that individual landlord, against that individual eviction, against the fact that just prices in general are increasing because the city is putting more and more luxury housing in places like Chinatown that used to be undesirable but now are very, very hot markets. And so what we really try to do, on an individual basis, what you can try to do is to get people more time so that they are able to find another affordable place for their family. But I think on the more systemic level, what we are trying to do is work with grassroots organizations to identify the types of policy changes that would need to happen to make sure that people that have been living in these neighborhoods, that have been building up these neighborhoods for years and invested in these communities, built the social networks that have been important for their survival, continue to survive and thrive, really.
I imagine you also have concerns about immigration. Even people with legal status do have legal challenges along the way. You help them with that as well?
Right. We do a variety of types of cases, whether it's working with undocumented immigrants or immigrants who have LPR status.
LPR meaning?
The green card, so lawful permanent resident status. We do a variety of things depending on the person and the organization that's referring them. And then more broadly, we are also trying to increase the amount of training that we do so that it's not just about the direct services that we are able to provide, even in connection with a grassroots organization, but really to make sure that people in the community understand their rights as immigrants and understand their rights generally as tenants, workers, whatever you may be. And so as an immigrant, you have certain rights in terms of immigration law, but you also have certain rights in terms of what, where you might live and the work that you should get paid for.
Talk about the backgrounds of the people you serve, because a lot of the times, people who've grown up in America take this for granted, and yet we're talking about people who come from maybe a very different environment.
Sure. Probably I would say the majority of the population that we work with are immigrants. Some of whom maybe have immigrated here 20, 30 years ago. Some of whom may have immigrated here, within the last couple months. And they face a variety of problems, some that overlap, some that don't. The majority of the communities that we work with happen to be largely Vietnamese and Chinese, because those are the largest lower income Asian American populations in the greater Boston area. But there are also an increasing number of Nepalese immigrants in Cambridge, for example. There are Cambodian immigrants in Revere, each culture faces kind of its own problems in some ways, but there are also many overlaps in terms of the types of wage issues, immigration issues, housing issues, family law issues, benefits issues that they see on a day-to-day basis. And many of the issues that we see coming in through community-based intake, whether it's in Dorchester or in Chinatown, are very similar.
You mentioned family law because I guess in dealing with something like domestic violence, that's something that, they probably need your help with that too sometimes, perhaps.
That's absolutely right, and it's been a focus of our unit for a very long time now, in part because there is this culture of not wanting to just talk about the types of violence that happen within our individual families, and sometimes because of that violence, people can get immigration relief and other relief related to that, and it's important. We've done a lot of work in terms of outreach and trainings to make sure that people in the community, it's both women and men, but primarily women, understand their rights as connected to domestic violence.
Well, I know how to look for Greater Boston Legal Services on the internet, but I guess people can also find you by just looking in the community, so you have a couple of locations they should know about?
That's right. That's exactly how people should find us, and that's usually how people find us. It's one of the hallmarks of our unit, is that we go into the community for intake. So at Chinese Progressive Association on Mondays, and at South Cove Medical Center on Tuesdays, and then at Viet Aid on Mondays as well.
Right. Thank you very much for being with us. Bethany Lee from Greater Boston Legal Services. We'll have more news in just a moment.